We can't buy our way into mental health by practicing therapy protocols or therapy formulae any more than we can buy our way into heaven by praying or by reciting Hail Marys. It's not as easy as that, obviously. It would be an insult to the state of mental health to think that we could buy our way into it in this way. Just as it is an insult to imagine that we can buy our way into heaven by being good girls and good boys and doing what we're told to do. It's not quite as simple as that. One mystic, I can't remember his name, but he said something like, if it was a straight choice between loyalty to God and loyalty to the truth, he would choose the truth every time. Which serves to illustrate what we should be focusing on. What we should be focusing on is the truth, rather than any of our mental projections, or rather than any of our ideas. The truth will set you free, says Jesus. And this is too simple for us to grasp. He didn't say we could buy our way into heaven by praying diligently or reciting Hail Marys. He said that we will be set free by the truth. And the way that we get set free by the truth is, just at the risk of repeating myself too often, not by entertaining ideal fantasies of liberation, fantasies of heaven, fantasies of enlightenment, fantasies of beings made out of light, as Jung says. All this stuff is kind of cotton candy, and it induces a state of unconsciousness invariably. It's got nothing to do with us. It's none of our business. What is our business is seeing the truth. And this relates to the idea of sincerity and the idea that it is extraordinarily hard for us to be sincere. So one way to go into this a bit more would be to say it's really, really hard for us to be sincere, because being sincere means seeing the truth. There's no other way to see the truth except in a sincere way. That's why the truth is so dangerous. It's not susceptible to games. And the truth is very clearly that we aren't enlightened, or that we aren't saintly, that we aren't these ideal ways of being that we want to reach. So that's all the fantasy stuff. What's real is us exactly the way that we are. And seeing the truth doesn't mean that we just have a quick glance and then set our eyes on the destination or the prize, having assured ourselves that we don't want to be this way, so we're going to improve, we're going to do better, we're going to strive in the direction of becoming better human beings. What it means is actually living the life of the person that we are. So this is what sincerity also comes down to. Living life as the somewhat crappy person we are, rather than assuming the mantle of spirituality and living on behalf of that ideal or that idea. And without meaning to get at spiritual folk so much, it's clear that there is this whole business that goes with it, and that business is presenting ourselves in this remarkably spiritual, compassionate, honest way that just doesn't ring true. And that's exactly analogous to the situation in an earlier age when we would often enough be trying to live in a godly way and a pious way. So all that stuff that means living in a godly way, we're told what it is. In a religious culture, that's drummed into us from the word go. So what could be easier than to ape it and to wear it as a garment? Not only is it easy, but also it confers benefits, because by conforming to the system of how we're supposed to be, everyone's going to we're going to get brownie points, basically. So if I'm living in a religious society and I wear the mantle of piety, it opens doors to me. And so if I have any degree of cunning in me, cleverness, I will ape piety for all I'm worth. And this isn't necessary to say that I do it totally cynically and totally consciously. More often than not, I imagine, one falls under the influence of the lie oneself and believes that one is as pious as one makes oneself out to be. And that's obviously a lot better, because it's guaranteed that you will feel better about yourself that way, rather than knowing that you're living a lie, which, if you were totally psychopathic, you wouldn't mind. But if you weren't psychopathic, you'd get to feel bad about that. So it's much better to swallow your own lie. So there are these parallels between traditional religious life and, in the West, this alternative New Age, what used to be called New Age. New Age isn't New Age anymore, really. It's kind of a bit past its sell by date, but what used to be called New Age spirituality. It's all the same. The leopard doesn't change its spots. So we might go around burning incense and saying namaste, but that doesn't make any difference. It's just another outfit for us to wear, really. And at the end of the day, it's no help to us to be wearing outfits. We might as well come as we are, because then we have the benefit of honesty on our side, even though we might not be able to curry favour with those who are pretending to be this, that or the other. So when we talk about being sincere, we're also talking about not pretending. And that's very, very easy to say and very, very easy to understand. But it's a real can of worms, this business of pretending. And the reason it's a real can of worms is because we don't know how to stop pretending, and we don't know how to stop pretending because we don't know that we're pretending. So even if I get the idea that I am pretending and I'm going to stop pretending, I'm only pretending that I'm stopping pretending because it's not really based on any insight. So having started off by talking about alternative spirituality or Eastern influence spirituality and traditional Western traditional Western way of doing things, we can apply all of that to therapy. So with therapy, it's possible for us to adopt the language, adopt the terminology, all of which seems to be based on certain insights which are essential for self-awareness or self-knowledge, but which are really just another garb, another attire, another thing for us to wear. And no matter how therapized our language might get, it doesn't make a darn bit of difference really, because that's not the point. The point, if only we could see it, is not to become special therapized people and to be in the world in a different way, or to have a different way of thinking about ourselves, or to have a special way of relating to ourselves or relating to our own thoughts, all that kind of complicated stuff. That's not therapy, that's just a mess. It's something which will suck us into swamps of self-deception in a flash. It's very, very tricky business, and no good can come out of going down that road. So what really does help is just serving ourselves up raw, as it were, and being exactly as we are, only noticing how we are. And that's where the work is, obviously, because anyone can be the way they are. Most of us do that, but when we do that, we're not noticing ourselves because we have a mental image of ourselves that is greater than the actuality. So we have a fantasy running of ourselves which glosses over how we actually are. So we're not really noticing how we are. We're living our mental fantasy the whole time, and in our mental fantasy we're validated. There's not too much dirt sticks to us, in other words. We're covered in Teflon because in our private fantasy we're not that culpable. So two ingredients are needed really. One ingredient is to carry on being exactly as we are, which is straightforward, that's going to happen anyway. But the other ingredient is to actually notice ourselves doing that, and noticing what we're like, what our lives are like, without reformulating it, without switching into fantasy. And it's fairly, although that is not easy, it's easy to know when we're doing it right, so to speak, if I can put it in a crude way like that. It's easy to know when we do it right because we don't like what we see. So when we emerge from the morass of unconsciousness, it's kind of like we're climbing out of a septic tank, really. Unpleasant though that image may be. And as is only natural when one climbs out of a septic tank. the contents of that septic tank will tend to stick to us and attach themselves to our clothes, and the general smell will attach to us as well. So there's a lot to be seen about ourselves that isn't going to be pleasant. And so that's good. That's our indicator. That's our litmus test to know whether we're engaged in self-deception as normal, or whether actually we're seeing a little bit of the truth. So whenever we notice ourselves in a bad light, that's good. It's great, really. Just so long as we don't, of course, start despising ourselves and hating ourselves and judging ourselves. Because that is another form of fantasy, really, because the only reason we take against ourselves when we discover we're not as great as we thought we were is because we're insisting on having this ideal, this model of how we should be, and we're falling short of that, and that makes us feel bad about ourselves. But of course, this idea of how we should be is the purest nonsense. It's absolute bullshit. There is no how I should be. There is only how I am. And there are no standards. The reason it hurts so much when I see myself in my true colours, so to speak, is because I've fallen off my pedestal, and there's pain involved in that. If I didn't have a pedestal and I didn't imagine I should be so much better, there wouldn't be the judgment and the self-recrimination. There would still be pain, and there would still be shock, you could call it, I suppose. But it wouldn't be a cognitive, mental, intellectual process of slapping categories on ourselves and thinking that we're bad people, or that we're this, or that we're that. It would the shock in question would be more of a twinge of awareness more than anything else, which is painful, but it's not self-judgment. It's a different thing to self-judgment. So we could ask, well, how come when we do start to emerge from the anesthetic miasmic swamp of unconsciousness, how come we end up looking bad, or how come there is this feeling of repugnance, maybe you could call it? And the answer to that is fairly simple, really. Anthony de Mello says that we're all selfish, just pure selfish from beginning to end, and that we do unselfish things in order to create an illusion that we're decent human beings. But that's the fantasy we're running. Which isn't to say that we aren't capable of spontaneous acts of altruism and love. Of course we are. But for most of us, for most of the time, the nitty-gritty of life is based on our purely selfish routines and habits. And I'd say that if someone wasn't stuck in all these purely selfish routines and habits, and they were spontaneously altruistic and loving, then they'd already be conscious. So the question of becoming conscious wouldn't come into it. But we're talking about the majority of us, the majority of us who are largely taken over by the economy of selfishness, which is the economy where we do everything for that good feeling we get when the self is validated or vindicated. So I could do all sorts of great things. I could work for charity. I could go out into the world and put myself out to do things. But if I'm doing that in order to validate myself and get a good feeling about myself, then there's no virtue in it at all, to use that old-fashioned word. It's kind of like the story where the Emperor of China asked Bodhidharma how much virtue he had accrued by building thousands and thousands of Buddhist temples all over the land. And so Bodhidharma, not being one for beating around the bush, said none, which apparently didn't go down well with the emperor, but there you are. So it's not what we do, but the reason we do it, the motivation that we do it. And the reason we do most stuff is on behalf of the self. But it's all cleverly shifted as with illusions that work with lots of mirrors. We don't quite see the true motivation. We don't see the self in it, but it's there all the same. And so because we don't see the self at work, plotting and planning and conniving and everything, we feel okay about ourselves. We enjoy the illusion that we're 100% decent human beings. But if you were to introduce consciousness into that picture, awareness into that picture, and then if you were to see the self there the whole time, grinning like some kind of goblin, pretending to be what it isn't, then that would be a difficult awareness. Awareness is always difficult. And yet, it's a very good awareness, good in the sense of wholesome. Because as it says in one of the sutras, to see illusion is to depart from it. And seeing illusion isn't necessarily such an easy thing because we've invested in that illusion. So to discover that the illusion is an illusion, although we might imagine that we could just let go of the illusion that second because it's only an illusion, so what the hell? We've invested an awful lot in it, so there's a lot of pain that goes with it. So that's a way of looking at this saying. The saying of Jesus is that the truth will set you free. It has more psychological depth to it than possibly we might think. It doesn't mean not going around telling porcupines the whole time. It involves being sincere with oneself. And as Gurdjieff says, being sincere with oneself brings an awful lot of suffering. Okay, thanks for watching.